I got tired of manually sorting through all my invoices, so I built an AI workflow that does it for me. Whenever I receive an email containing invoices as attachments, this workflow will automatically be triggered. Here we can see that email that I received, and this contains 2 invoices. Now this will automatically fire off a workflow that I created in vectorshift, and after processing those invoices, I will receive this response, giving me a summary of the 2 invoices. So we've got an invoice from Anthropic and another one from Cursor, and each of them were $20. This data is then also stored in a database. For this tutorial, we'll simply use a Google spreadsheet. Here we can see the vendor names. We can also categorize these invoices, and this will pull the currency, the amount, along with the invoice date, or any other information that we want to extract. This solution is super flexible. So let's have a look at building this. First, go ahead and create a Google spreadsheet and simply add the columns vendor, category, currency, amount, and invoice date, or whatever other information you want to collect. Then to build the solution, we will be using a no-code platform called vectorshift. So go over to vectorshift.ai and log in or sign up for an account. Then go to pipelines. Then let's create a new pipeline. And let's click on create pipeline. Let's rename this pipeline to something like Invoice Master Pipeline and press enter. Now this pipeline will be triggered whenever we receive a new email. So what we can do is go to triggers and let's add the Gmail trigger. Then let's click on new email, and you can then add your Gmail account by clicking on this button. Then click on sign in with Google, select your email account, click on continue, and simply tick all of these boxes. Click on continue, and vectorshift will now be connected to your Gmail account. Then let's click on select mailbox, and from here let's select inbox, and let's confirm this selection. Right, so this will trigger the workflow whenever we receive an email, and this node gives us different output. We get things like the subject line, the sender email, and more importantly, the attachments, as we will assume that these invoices will be attached to the email. And also take note that these attachments are of type file, and more specifically, a list of files. Obviously, you can have more than one attachment in your email, right? So what we want to do in this workflow is process each file individually. So if there were 2 attachments, we want to extract information from the first file, and then update our Google Sheet with the data that we extracted, and then create a summary of that invoice, which we can include in our email. Now, typically when we have to process a list of values, I prefer to create a separate pipeline that will process each of those entries one by one. So let's go back to pipelines. Then let's create another pipeline. Let's create a pipeline from scratch. And let's call this one Invoice Sub Pipeline. This pipeline will actually be doing the majority of the work. Let's start by adding an input node, and let's change the type from text to file. I'm also going to rename this node to Invoice. So this pipeline will receive some file. This could be a Word document, a text document, could be a PDF file, whatever. The output of this node will be the text that was extracted from that document. And from this text, we want to extract certain information. We want to grab the vendor name, the currency, the amount, and the invoice date. We will get back to the category in a minute. So thankfully, extracting information from text is super simple in vectorshift. We can use the power of AI to do this for us. Go to Data Transformation, then add the AI Ops node. This node is super powerful. We can use it to extract data, summarize data, categorize data, score text, translate text, etc. We want to extract data. So let's select Extract Data. Then for the text to extract, let's enter double curly braces. Then let's select the Invoice node. And from the Invoice node, let's select Processed Text. So it's this output over here. Now we can specify the fields that we want to extract. So let's add the vendor, which is of type text. And for the description, we can enter any description that will assist the AI in figuring out how to extract this information. I'll just keep it simple and say vendor name. Then let's add another field like the currency, and for the description, let's say currency symbol like a $. let's add another field, like the date, and for the description, we'll say the invoice date in year, month, date. Finally, let's add one more field, and this will be the amount. And for the description, let's enter extract the invoice amount, like 23.24 as an example. Cool. We can already test this out by clicking on Run. I'm going to select a file, and then I'll run this workflow. Right, so I can now expand additional outputs, and here we can see we get the date, the amount. I'll try and zoom in a bit. We get the date, the amount, the vendor, and our currency code. An easier way to view this output, by the way, is we can just go to General, we can do Output, and then in the output, let's simply grab the results from this Extract Data node, and then we can decide to grab any of these fields, and if I run this in the chat, we can see the output over here. Cool. Now we also want to get the category of this invoice. So what we can do is use the classifier node by going to Data Transformation. Let's add AI Ops. Then from this list, let's select this categorizer option. Now it's asking us for the text to categorize. Now all we have to do is grab the text from our invoice file, like so, and now we can give it the different categories. So we can enter food, and for the category description, we can say invoice seems to be related to food purchase. Let's add another category. I'll add software with a description of invoice seems to be related to software purchase. Let's add a few more, like office supplies, with a description of invoice seems to be related to office supplies. And finally, we'll just add one more for miscellaneous. So if we had to run this, we can look at the outputs from this node, and the category was determined to be software. Alright, cool. Now that we have all of this information extracted and we've classified this invoice, we can finally update our Google Sheet. This is super simple. Go to Integrations, add the Google Sheet node, and select Add New Row. You'll have to connect your Gmail account, so if you haven't done so already, simply add an integration to your Google Sheet, then click on Next, then pick a file. So I'll select my invoice data file, and I'll select my Invoices tab. That is because I call this tab Invoices in my sheet. Let's click on Confirm Selection, and now all we have to do is map these values from these previous nodes. I'm just going to rename this node to Invoice Data, and for the node just below it, let's call this one Invoice Category. Cool. So now in our Google Sheets node, for the vendor, I'll type in double curly braces. Let's select Invoice Data, and let's select Vendor. Let's do the same for category. We'll select Invoice Category, and we'll select the category output. Let's do the same thing for the currency. So we'll select Invoice Data and Currency. Let's do the same thing for the amount. So we'll select Invoice Data and Amount. Finally, let's also do the date. So we'll enter double curly braces, invoice data, and date. So let's run this. Let's process the same invoice. Alright, our Google Sheet node finished processing, and if we have a look at the sheet, we can see this new record over here. We're not done with this pipeline quite yet. We're now successfully adding the entry to our sheet, but we also want to write a short summary of this invoice, as we will be sending the summary via email back to our user. So let's add this text node. And in this node, we'll simply add all of our values together, and then we'll pass it to a large language model to create a summary for us. So let's start by adding our category, and we can get the category from invoice category and the category output. Let's also add our vendor. This we can get from invoice data.vendor. Let's do the same thing for the currency. So we can get this from invoice data.currency. Let's also do the same thing for the amount. So this we can get from invoice data and amount. And finally, let's also add our invoice date, which we can get from invoice data and date. Cool, so now we have this text. All we have to do is pass this text to a large language model and ask it to summarize this for us. Let's go to LLM and let's add OpenAI. First, let's add a system instruction. This will tell the AI model what to do. Let's say, write a summary using the following invoice details. This summary will be sent to the user as a notification, so keep it super concise. Then for the prompt, we'll simply grab this value from our text node. So let's select text and the text output. And finally, we can simply output the response from our OpenAI node. So go to General, add an output node, and what this will return is the output from our AI model. Select OpenAI and select response. So I've deleted that entry and I actually want to test this. So let's click on run. I'll simply run it with the same invoice. And this time we have this output field which will show the output from our large language model. How cool is that? And if we have a look at our sheet, we can indeed see that new entry. Awesome. So now we have a pipeline that will process one file at a time. And we'll simply call this pipeline from our master pipeline in a loop. Before we can use this pipeline within another pipeline, we simply have to deploy it. So click on Deploy Changes, click on Deploy, and that's it. We're done with this sub-pipeline. Let's go back to our pipelines. Let's click on Invoice Master Pipeline. And what we want to do now is under General, let's add this pipeline node, like so. And then in the list of pipelines, let's add our Invoice sub-pipeline. Under Invoice, it's expecting us to upload one file, a single file. But we actually have a list of files that we need to process. Now, in order to process more than one file, we can switch over to list mode. So all we have to do is click on this button to enable list mode. Now, we can click on this drop-down and select our Gmail trigger node and then select the list of attachments. This will now run our sub-pipeline in a loop for each of these attachments, and that sub-pipeline will return a list of our summaries. So you will notice that this output on this node is also a list. Now we want to grab the list of summaries and compile that into a single email and then send that email back to our user. Now we don't want to send a list of summaries back. We actually just want to grab this list of summaries, compile it into a single piece of text, and then send that text back to the user. So squashing this down into a single piece of text is really simple. Let's go to Data Transformation. Let's add this List Ops node. And in this node, we have a few options. What we're interested in is this Join List Item option. Within this List to Join, let's click on this drop-down. Let's select our pipeline and the output. So it's this pipeline over here, which returns a list of summaries. Then let's enable Join by New Line. This will simply write each of these summaries onto their own line within the email. And finally, all we have to do is respond to that email with our summaries. Let's go to Integrations. Let's add the Gmail node. Then let's click on Send Reply. Then let's click on Next. And then for the To address, you could simply hardcode this to your email address. I'll simply reply back to the original email. So I'll select the Gmail node. And let's select the sender email. Now for the body, let's select Join List Item and let's select Joined Text. And finally, for the email ID, we want to use the same email ID that was returned by this initial Gmail node. So this email ID output over here. This is how Gmail will know which email to reply to. So let's select our Gmail node and the email ID field. And believe it or not, that is actually all we have to do to automate this process. Let's deploy this pipeline so that it's actually active in production. Now let's give this a spin. Alright, so I've sent this email to myself containing these two attachments. And after a second or two, I get the summary back saying I've got this invoice, and this is the amount, and the invoice was sent from Anthropic. And then we've got a second one from Cursor as well. And looking at the spreadsheet, I can see those two records were automatically added. How awesome is that? And this is just such a common and powerful use case for using large language models. If you would like to see how to build other practical solutions using vectorshift, then check out my playlist over here. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one.